up, we have got Robert Lauko from Liquity. I'm very excited about this talk. I might be slightly biased. I'm an advisor to this project, disclaimer. But Robert's going to be talking about interest-free borrowing on Ethereum, and I will let Robert take it away.
Thank you, Ashley, for this introduction, and I'm very glad to be here, and thanks for having me. So let me share my screen, and then I can just start presenting. So as Ashley mentioned, I'm going to present Liquity. Liquity is an interest-free borrowing protocol built on Ethereum. And now let me just start with a short overview of what I'm going to talk about. First of all, I would like to outline what makes a stablecoin borrowing system attractive to the borrower or to the end user. And then in the next section, what I would like to do is just look at what kind of key ingredients or building blocks there must be in order to achieve those goals, to make stablecoin borrowing as attractive as possible. And I will cover those ingredients like efficient liquidations and our stability mechanisms in more details later on. So let me basically start with this, with the first, what should a borrowing protocol really achieve and offer to the user? It should be obvious that 0% interest would be very attractive because nobody likes paying interests or fees. And then it's also maybe not that obvious, but to some people, this is a relatively important property that the system is immutable and really decentralized, which means that the whole system acts in a fully autonomous way. So there is nobody who can interfere with it or tamper with it. And then last but not least, speaking of collateralized borrowing, because Liquity is all about collateralized borrowing, we also wanted to make it capital efficient, which basically boils down to having a minimum collateral ratio as low as possible. In our case, we are targeting 110%.
Hey, just quickly, if you have slides, you might want to you share them because I don't think we're seeing them.
Oh, that's strange. Oh, sorry. I'm really sorry. Can you see them now?
Yes, we can.
Really sorry. Yeah, so here are my slides. So basically, I'm talking about these three properties. We want to achieve 0% interest rate, immutability and decentralization, and capital efficiency. So capital efficiency here boils down to a low collateral ratio, which in our case should be 110%. This is still subject to an ongoing agent-based modeling effort, but based on our first intuition, it should be around this number. And now, what do those three desiderata really entail, or what do we need to do in order to achieve them in our system? So here, I think, if starting with the interest rate, it's important that we can issue our own stablecoin, because only if we can basically mint our own stablecoin that we give out as a loan, only then can we make it interest-free. Because otherwise, if we need to source it somewhere on the capital market, it would mean that the system would need to pay interest rates for it so that it cannot lend it out to others without charging any interest rate. And another aspect here is that interest rates are also important in some systems to keep the stablecoin really pegged to the US dollar or whatever underlying they have. And we do this differently by making our stablecoin redeemable at face value. So you can always get an equivalent amount, an amount that is equivalent to the face value of the stablecoins that you redeem. And this redeemability is coupled with a set of one-off fees, which, even though they are fees, they are only payable at the beginning. So you are not subject to some variable fees as you would with an interest rate. And then with immutability and decentralization, what's really important for us here is that we make our system governance free. And governance free not only means there is no body that can vote on parameter changes, but there is also no admin who could just stop or interfere with the system. And we would also just start or use Ether as our only collateral in our first release, at least. So this means that Ether, being really the native currency of the Ethereum network, this makes our system as decentralized as possible. We are not relying on any kind of token that may be subject to some centralized influence. And we go one step further by making it so that third parties can run front ends, and they are even incentivized to do so, so that nobody can just easily shut down our own servers, because we won't even run our own like web interface. We are focusing on building the protocol and then release it into the wild. And then for capital efficiency, like what's important there is really a way of liquidating positions that fall below this minimum collateral ratio in a very efficient way. And we should also incentivize liquidators to that end, like especially if the gas costs are high. So we need to pay them some compensation for the gas costs. And we also rely on an Oracle or price feed service that's fast and reliable, because that's like the base input that determines whether a position or needs to be liquidated or not. So let me first of all like give you more details on our instant efficient liquidation mechanism. If we compare it to what like existing CDP platforms do, it's either they are like, when a position becomes under collateralized, they either do collateral auctions where they basically sell the collateral to the highest bidder, or they just sell the collateral at a fixed price. Like fixed price probably means that there is a discount on the current Oracle price. Now, the problem with this is that such a liquidation mechanism is generally rather slow and inefficient by design, because collateral takes time, auctions take time, and also with the fixed price sell-offs and the discounts, it's not as efficient like price-wise as it could be. So we, on the other hand, we try and do it differently by introducing a mechanism for liquidations where we can basically use the existing stakeholders in our system to liquidate our troves. So we call the CDPs in our system, the individual borrowers' positions, we call them troves. Just to clarify that expression here. So what we want to achieve with that is to have like this fast and efficient liquidation, so that there is no need to find a buyer or bidder, because they are already somewhere in our system available. And there should be no risk of further price drops, which could happen during like a lengthy liquidation process. Now, how do we achieve this? This is a little bit involved, but I will walk you through the main steps of this mechanism. So we have to differentiate between two system modes. On the left-hand side, we have the normal, the healthy mode of our system, which is the case when the total system collateral ratio is above 150%. Again, this value is subject to simulations, and we may have to adapt it. And then on the other hand, there is a special liquidation mode that would kick in, or that would take place if the total system collateral ratio is below 150%. But let's focus on the healthy, on the like normal operation mode of our system. And this involves two steps. One is a stability pool, which you can think of as an insurance pool, which is there to absorb every trove that needs to be liquidated. Like every trove that falls below this 110% would first be liquidated against the stability pool. And if the stability pool is not sufficient because it doesn't contain enough tokens for liquidating those troves, then we would fall back to another mechanism, which is a redistribution, which involves all the other borrowers in our system. So I will skip the recovery mode for now and just show you how this main stability pool-based and redistribution-based liquidation works in a bit more detail now. So LUSD, this is the name of our stablecoin. It's obviously pegged to the US dollar. Now, every holder of this LUSD token can deposit it to what we call a stability pool. So at any time, any holder can do that. So this pool will fill up over time. And then there is also another pool which may like collect Ether tokens from liquidated positions. But at the beginning, it will just start empty. Now, let's say this position falls below the minimum collateralization ratio. Here you see the debt in red and the collateral in blue. And like we just assume here that this is below 110% as an example. So what happens is that the system can simply burn like the equivalent amount of tokens like the amount that's defined by the debt of this position is burned from the stability pool. And the debt can then be cleared here. So the debt is gone and the tokens were burned. Now what happens again, or what happens as the next step is that the ether that was held by this trove is just sent to the ether pool. Now this pool contains some ether from the position. And just the fact that those liquidations happen slightly below 110% collateralization means that whatever gain is sent to this pool should be higher than the amount that stability depositors lose. Like the amount of LUSD they lose should be lower than the amount or the value of the ether that they gain here. And obviously, or just to go back here, the main idea is that you can basically deposit as a holder, you can deposit your LUSD to the stability pool, and then you can cash out whenever you want. And the gains and the losses, they are calculated like in proportion to the deposit that you've made, because there will be obviously not just one depositor, there will be many. So the system just takes their stakes or their deposit as a measure to determine who gets what share of the pie. Now it can still happen that there are just too many positions or troves that need to be liquidated, or just large ones, so that this stability pool would get emptied. Or if this, like basically this debt in red is larger than this debt in, like the tokens held in the stability pool, then we can only partially absorb this position via the stability pool. There will be like a rest. Like you see here, red is still, there is still some remainder debt and remaining collateral here, which we need to somehow liquidate. And as I mentioned, there is a secondary or fallback mechanism called redistribution, which would then kick in. And as the name says, basically we are just redistributing shares or chunks of this position to all the other borrowers in the system. Now, again, this would happen in proportion to the collateral, to like those blue bars. So we chunk up this, the collateral of this trove and give those shares to all the other borrowers in the system. And bang, they got it. So you see that the bars, like they are now slightly larger. And we do the same with the debt, like in red, we also just chunk it up and give it to all the borrowers in the system. So this is done. And now we see that the position was fully liquidated, and everybody got some collateral and some debt. And again, the same rule or same property would hold that if we assume that our oracle is fast enough and there is somebody to trigger the liquidation function quickly enough, that then this liquidation should happen at the collateral ratio, which is still above 100%, close to 110% ideally, which means that those borrowers who receive the shares from the liquidated position, they would not lose anything. So they would rather gain like a net value from the position. So this was all about liquidations. Now I would like to cover another topic, which is also important, and this is how our system achieves price stability for its stablecoin. Now, again, here we do things a bit differently from existing systems. Those CDP platforms out there, they generally use variable interest rates, which are set by human governance mechanism. This is a bit like a central bank where you can basically modulate the attractiveness of the loans by setting an interest rate so that you can basically contract or expand money supply by making loans more or less attractive. And there is also something which I call a soft peg mechanism, which basically involves that whenever a stablecoin has like a long-term perspective of being stable and pegged to $1, then you can say that if there is like a short-term deviation from the peg, let's say it's slightly above $1, that means that people would have an incentive now to take out loans because they would hope that in the future that would go back to $1, so that when they repay their loans, they would need slightly less money to repay basically their debts. And the other ways, the opposite is true. If it's below $1, it makes sense for you to repay maybe even a bit earlier than you would have repaid if it was exactly $1. Now, we, on the other hand, we have a zero interest rate system, as I mentioned initially, and also we have fees in our system, but they are algorithmically governed. So the system just looks at its own variables and like the state of everything and determines the fees. And what it also has is this redeemability, which I will just cover in a sec, which is not present in existing platforms. And now with those, with the fact that we have a redeemable token and we also have a relatively low collateralization ratio at 110%, we can create a price floor and a price ceiling. So we can basically squeeze the price between those two boundaries, which would act as relatively hard boundaries compared to the soft peg mechanism that I mentioned here. But we'll see how that works. So generally, we have the borrower operations, like the borrowers who just deposit Ether as their collateral and take out loans in LUSD. That's like similar to what is already there in the market. But what we add here is a redemption right or a redemption mechanism, which basically entitles any holder of LUSD to basically exchange LUSD for Ether at face value, which means that you get like a value of Ether in return, which just corresponds to the dollar value of your LUSD. Like basically you get like, let's say you redeem 100 LUSD, you would get back $100 worth of Ether. And this, now the question is like, where does the system take like the Ether from? And obviously it needs to take it from the borrowers because it does not come with its own like pre-filled reserve. So what we do here is that we basically sort the troves by collateral ratio. You see here, this is the riskiest one, this is a bit less riskier, and so on. And this is really well over collateralized. So this is still our borrower Bob. And now when Ashley comes along and wants to redeem LUSD for Ether, like what happens is basically that the system starts at this position and it uses the Ether that are redeemed to repay Bob's position, like repay Bob's debt. So this happens then. And what also happens is that the system takes the amount from Bob's collateral, which corresponds to the amount of debt repaid, and gives it to Alice. And if there is there should be a surplus here, a remainder, because this position was collateralized at above 110%, this remains with Bob. So Bob does not lose anything. It's just the fact that he loses basically the opportunity of staying invested. And if the redeemed amount is more than the debt of Bob, it would just proceed with the next riskiest position and do the same there. So repay the debt of this one and give the collateral, an equivalent amount of collateral to the person, and so on. So this obviously means that there is a risk of being affected or hit by redemptions as a borrower, but you can lower your risk by increasing your collateral ratio, by making sure that you are not at the bottom end of this sorted list, but let's say in the middle or in a higher range. Now what we also do is we take fees on, or we charge fees on both the loan issuance, which is like a one-off fee. Like when you take out your loan, you may have to pay an issuance fee. By default, this fee is set to 0%, but it can go up. And similarly, there is also a one-off redemption fee, which is charged on the redeemed amount. Like both the issuance fee and the redemption fee, they are one-time fees, and they are like determined as percentages of the loaned amount or the redeemed amount. And the fees, they are charged in LUSD here and in Ether for the redemption, and they are collected in a staking contract, which holds our secondary token called LQTY. So the stakers of these LQTY tokens, they would get like a share of the fee revenue generated by the system. And you see that an issuance fee has a very strong immediate effect on the attractivity of new loans, basically, because, I mean, if you have to pay, let's say, 5% on the loan amount as a fee, you would rather consider whether you want to take out the loan now or wait maybe a few days or weeks until the fee would go down to zero. Because we see that the fees, they are algorithmically governed, and they are governed in a way that whenever there is a redemption, they would go up because the system like can detect with the redemption or just infer that whenever somebody redeems tokens, the tokens would be below $1. So if the price of one LUSD is below $1, it makes sense for you to redeem because what you get back from the system in Ether is worth more than this $1. So, I mean, and in such a situation, it makes sense for the system to raise the issuance fee at least, because by making the loans more like expensive, it can throttle the growth of the system. Because whenever the price is below $1, there is this kind of risk that the system is just growing too fast and it needs to be throttled. And then we also have a time-based decay where the current base rate, which serves as a basis for the redemption fee and the issuance fee, would just decay and go back to 0%. So in a state where the system has no redemptions, nobody redeems, the fee should eventually go back to 0%. And this, if you put that all together, leads to like a nice price dynamics, because we can basically have a price floor down here, because if the price is below $1 minus the fee that you would pay on redemptions, in that area, it makes sense for you to redeem. And there is also price ceiling, which is a result of the fact that if the price trades above 110, like $1.10, then you can basically take out the maximum amount of LUSD against your Ether at this 110% collateral ratio, and then sell your LUSD on the market and make an arbitrage gain. So we basically have arbitrage opportunities above the ceiling and also below the floor. And in between, we still have a soft peg mechanism, similarly to what's already like the case with similar systems. And I will skip this. This is just like another way of showing how the price dynamics work out in practice. And I just want to quickly cover like the last topic of this talk, which is an incentive mechanism for front ends and early adopters. As I mentioned in the beginning, we really want to make it so that the system will be decentralized. And we don't want to just rely on our own front end. So we need to have some enshrined incentives to make it attractive to front ends to run a web interface. And the way this works is we will create like a front-end launch kit, which would be relatively easy to install for anybody, and also release like an SDK for our system, which allows existing platforms, integrator wallets to build upon or integrate our system. So those front ends, they can be part of our system, and they can set a kickback rate between 0% and 100%. And now when the system is in action and people like borrowers and stability depositors use the front end basically to interact with the back end, like with the protocol, then the system would measure the turnover generated by those early adopters. And based on the turnover, it would calculate like an allocation of LQTY tokens, which is our secondary token, the one that captures the fees. So the more turnover a front end generates, the higher will be its share of LQT tokens that it receives over time. So this is a continuous allocation. Early adopters will get more, so the curve will start high and then go down over time. And the kickback rate also means that there is a part which goes to or which stays with the front end, but the rest, which is defined as the kickback, is basically sent to the users. We haven't like fully defined yet what would be the basis for this incentive mechanisms, whether it would be the stability deposits made by them or the borrowed amount or some combination of the two. But anyway, the idea is that the users would get those LQTY tokens based on the kickback rate and based on the amounts that they transact through the front end. So there is a very high incentive to become an early adopter user or a front end for our system. So that's it. I'm here to answer questions, and I just wanted to say that we are planning launch for Q1 next year, and we already have a dev UI live on all important testnets, which can be accessed via devui.liquidity.org. Thank you so much for your attention.
Awesome. Thanks, Robert. We did have a question. So Toilet Head asks, is this only for short-term loans like Aave?
This can be for short-term or much longer-term loans. So there is no limit on the duration of loans. The only limit you have is that you have to keep your collateralization above the minimum threshold, which is 110%. There is no minimum or maximum period of your debt.
Okay, great. There's another question in the chat about assessing loan risk for each loan. So does the system assess loan risk individually, or is there an aggregate way of assessing risk?
I'm not sure if I understand the question right, but the idea is that the loans, they are collateralized. They do not depend on the credibility or the creditworthiness of the borrower as a person. But of course, the lower the collateralization ratio, the riskier the loan, because with the price movements of the Ether used as collateral, there is a higher chance that they may fall below or may drop in this range where they can get liquidated. So, and we use this kind of riskiness to evaluate which loan should be hit by a redemption or subject to redemptions.
Okay, great. Awesome. And when is Liquidity going to be live?
So Liquidity should be live in Q1 next year. This is on our schedule, and yeah, we do our best to make it happen.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thank you so much, Robert. Really appreciate you joining. If no one else has any questions, I don't know, Robert, you might want to monitor the chat in case there are any additional questions, but that was all that I saw for now.